Right, I've had enough of this. It's time for us to bring back Overrated, Underrated, because I really need to talk about this game. This game is a game that everybody knows that I talk about a lot. And that game is Valkyrie Profile. Yes, Valkyrie Profile. The game that everybody thinks that I like, but really I don't like. I think this game is utter shite. I think this game is overrated and garbage. I think this game is the worst game I've ever played in my life. And quite frankly, I think that people shouldn't play it. I think that it should be illegal to play this game. Now, the biggest problem with Valkyrie Profile, I'll tell you what the biggest problem with Valkyrie Profile. There isn't a story! All you do in this game is you basically flutter around this empty world, then you go into this town. Oh wait, you've just wasted time because you've just lost a period point. So you have to leave town, and then you go to a dungeon, and you go all the way to the end of the dungeon, and you kill a boss, and then you have to do a spiritual concentration and a new dungeon comes up. And then you do the same shit all over again. Oh, and there's a few cutscenes in between that have nothing to do with any plot or anything like that. You just kind of like do all of these cutscenes that have nothing to do with anything that you just watch. And then a character joins your party that'll never talk for the rest of the game, outside of the sacred phase, but I don't count that. And on top of all that, while you might think that the game allows for freedom, you'd be wrong. Because the game actually requires you to do things in a specific order. If you don't do things in a specific order, you get sent all the way back to the beginning of the game because you've lost. Now, you might not think that you've lost, but you have, because when you get ending B, you've lost. And you won't know that until you get ending B, but the reality is, ending B is the game over screen. That's the plot twist of the game. I know I've spoiled the plot to you, but that's something that you need to be aware of so that you don't do it, because the B ending just is not worth your time. If you got the B ending, you didn't finish the game. I'm sorry to tell you, because you missed half the plot. The actual story of this game is in the A ending. I'm not going to spoil what happens in the A ending, but you've got to get to it. And to get to it, you have to go through a gauntlet of bullshit. Not to mention the fact that the dungeon designer was the same guy who was the planner for Star Ocean 3, which should tell you a lot. It should tell you a lot about how much of an ordeal this game's dungeons are. I mean, there's literally a dungeon where you have to basically get to a boss room, and to do it you have to do the most infuriating platforming segment known to man. And yes, I'm talking about that section in the Arcane Ruins. Fuck that section. That is one of the most annoying sections I've ever had the displeasure of going through. Not to mention the fact that there's like tons of enemy encounters. Like Valkyrie Profile 2, you go into a dungeon and you fight the occasional enemy encounter, and yeah, it doesn't feel like it goes on forever, but there's like tons of enemies in this game, and like the dungeons just go on for ages and ages and ages. But then you realise that there's really nothing else to this game, because it's just dungeon crawling and cutscenes and dungeon crawling and cutscenes, rinse and repeat. There's literally nothing else to it. You're basically just playing a glorified dungeon crawler and a glorified visual novel, if you can call it a visual novel, because there's not really anything else to this game. There's nothing else to do. You can't go around towns. I mean, well, you can, but there's nothing to do there. You can talk to NPCs, but why bother? It's a waste of period points, and period points could be used to farm levels, to level up your characters and make them stronger, so you can send them to Valhalla and get more loot from Odin for sending him a strong Einherjar. But no, you wasted all of that time by bopping around towns doing nothing. I mean, yeah, sure, you can get items every now and again, and of course the Einherjar, but unless you know exactly where the items are and when you get access to them, then it's pointless to go to towns. So what's the point in the whole free roaming aspect of this game? What's the point in giving players freedom to go wherever the hell they want? There isn't any. The thing about this game that pisses me off the most is the fact that a lot of the treasure chests in this game are booby-trapped. And I mean this, like, you will have treasure chests with an explosion trap on top of a bottomless pit. And you open that treasure chest and it will push you off the platform down into the bottomless pit, and it's instant death. And I'll tell you why it's instant death. Because when you die in a dungeon in this game, you get sent back to the world map. But the thing about it is, and this is the thing about the game, when you're playing Valkyrie Profile, the thing that you want to avoid is using too many period points. Your punishment for death is you lose 3 period points, because basically the dungeon you entered cost 3 period points to enter, and to re-enter it costs another 3 period points. I might be getting that number wrong because I don't remember exact numbers in this game. I just know that there is a cost to period points in this game, and yeah, you waste it if you go into too many areas for no reason. And you also waste period points if you die. So, yeah, that's something to think about. And the only time you game over is in any of the endings. And 2 of the endings, it's guaranteed. So, basically, you're fucked unless you get the A ending. And that's how this game works, and a lot of people don't get this. They just think, oh, I'll just go bopping around Midgard and just flutter around and just go to all these different places, and then you get to the end of the game and then you just feel like the game slaps you in the face with its massive cock, because that's what this game likes to do a lot. And I swear to God, you are not ready for this shit. And even if you are ready for this shit, it's going to be an ordeal regardless, because you have to look up a guide with every step you take, because there's so many things that can screw you over and make you not get the A ending. So many little things like, you walked out of this dungeon, no A ending, game over for you at the end. And that's the thing, it's not even an instant game over. You don't know if you're going to get game over or not until the end of the game, which is ridiculous. And the game isn't necessarily short. I mean, it can be if you skip all the way to the end. I mean, there's an ending for that. But on top of all this, it's possible to soft lock yourself if you are underleveled and you get to the end and you can no longer backtrack, and then you fight a boss that you have to fight to actually beat the game, and then you realise you can't fight them, so then you have to restart the entire game from scratch if you didn't have a save file, which kind of screws you. And that's a huge problem with the game as well. So this game just isn't fair at all. It's bullshit. This is one of those bullshit games I have ever played in my life. I swear to God. And people give this game a free pass all the time. Like, people make out that Valkyrie Profile is like this masterpiece of a game. And I'm serious, like, people will worship this game. They will worship this game like those people who worship Saber bootlegs. But that's how worshipped this game is. Like, you hear people talk about the Valkyrie Profile series, there's always going to be that one person. And I mean that one person who goes out of their way to make a point. To make a point that Valkyrie Profile 1 is better than Valkyrie Profile 2. Also, Valkyrie Profile 1 is better than Covenant of the Plume. That Valkyrie Profile 1 is the best and every other Valkyrie Profile is shit. But usually it's Valkyrie Profile 1 is better than Valkyrie Profile 2 because those people don't even know that Covenant of the Plume exists. And if they do know that Covenant of the Plume exists, then they'll shit on that game as well. And yeah, most people don't even know that 2 and Covenant of the Plume exist for that reason, because Valkyrie Profile 1 gets all the attention, and I'm kind of tired of it. I'm kind of sick and tired of people making every fucking excuse under the sun as to why Valkyrie Profile 2 is rubbish, just simply because Valkyrie Profile 1 is good. And I'm tired of it. I'm getting really tired of it. It's kind of getting old, guys. You know? I get that other people have different opinions, but this is kind of ridiculous. Like, why do people feel the need to make a point that Valkyrie Profile 1 is better than 2? It's like me saying, oh yeah, Onimusha 2 is way better than Onimusha Dawn of Dreams, which you'd never hear me say because I love both games. And honestly, like, if I was to weigh both games up, like, I'd actually be tempted to put Dawn of Dreams above Onimusha 2 in some ways, but, you know, it's such a close tie that, unfortunately, you know, it's really difficult for me to pick a favourite, but it ended up being 2 because, well, a few of the little things. But why would I ever discredit a game that I like? Why would I ever go out of my way to discredit a game that I like? I just don't understand it. I just don't get it. Why do people always do this? Why do people always have to make that point? Make a point that Valkyrie Profile 1 was the better game and 2 sucks. Every time that Valkyrie Profile is discussed, there's always that one guy. Just every single time. I fucking swear to God, you talk about Valkyrie Profile anywhere, and I swear you will see that one guy somewhere who will remind everyone that 2 is the inferior game. You will see that. Either that, or you'll see me saying that 2 is the superior game, which it is. Because that's facts. Okay, maybe not facts, but, you know, it's what I said, so, you know, there's a bit of weight to that. Because I said it, you know what I mean? It's like, it means that it matters more because I said it. So, you should listen to me. Because I've played both games, and I can tell you right now, after playing both games, I know which is the better game. I'm not messing about, people. I'm not one of those guys who gloats about the fact that he owns, like, a super rare physical copy of the original Valkyrie Profile on PlayStation. Because I'm sorry, guys, but the original Valkyrie Profile never came out on PlayStation in Europe. So I don't own a copy of that game. Does that make me any less of a fan? Does it? Does it? No! But at the same time, am I a fan of Valkyrie Profile? That's a good question. I mean, I've talked about Valkyrie Profile 2 a lot on my channel, and I've even talked about Valkyrie Profile quite a bit on my channel, and honestly, I do kinda like Valkyrie Profile. I do kinda like Valkyrie Profile now that I've played it again, and actually got the A ending after playing Valkyrie Profile 2, I do kinda like the game. And honestly, when I first played Valkyrie Profile, I absolutely hated it. I thought it was one of the worst games I've ever played in my life. But when I played Valkyrie Profile 2, and I got to the end of that game, I immediately wanted to go back to Valkyrie Profile and re-experience Valkyrie Profile, and I ended up loving it. Which should tell you a lot about how great Valkyrie Profile 2 is. It made me give Valkyrie Profile 1 a second chance. And that's why I did the Where to Start video on Valkyrie Profile 1 and 2. That's why I did it. Because I want people to experience the greatness of Valkyrie Profile 2 one way or another. Even if it does spoil some events. I want people to experience that because I know that if you experience the first game, you'll want to go back as well. You'll want to go back to the first game and see what went down in it. And if you go backwards, it's actually better because you actually get to experience all the world building that that game has. And that's where the game shines the most. The world building. The music's pretty good too. I like the music. The combat, it set the foundation for what 2 did. It's not the best combat out there, but it's still pretty decent, especially for the time. I mean, they got the groundwork set, it just needed a bit of work putting into the combat system that wasn't yet fully fleshed out and developed. But, I mean, come on, it was the first attempt, so you've got to look at it from that perspective. It is an older game, so I do kind of respect that fact, but if you go back today, you'll see that it's not really as great as 2, and it's kind of a bit dated. But I really think that the game is unique. I really think that the game has a lot going for it. I mean, the best way I can describe Valkyrie Profile is it's an unpolished masterpiece. It's a rough diamond. It's a cracked diamond. It's a game that was just a complete catastrophe. A complete catastrophe that had so much potential to be the best game ever, but didn't manage to be it because of all of its problems. Valkyrie Profile has way too many problems for me to recommend it, but at the same time I have to recommend it because of its connection to Valkyrie Profile 2, and that's kind of the issue I have with it. I have kind of a love-hate relationship with it. I love the events that happen. I love moments in the game's narrative that occur in the sort of like whatever you want to call it, because, well, it's not really much of a story, is it? It's just a set of events that you have to watch in cutscenes as you progress through, because there's not really much of a story until the A ending, but the A ending story can best be described as too little too late. That's the best way I can describe the A ending. I mean, it's definitely story, and there's definitely more to it, and what's there is good, but it needed more. And that's where Valkyrie Profile 2 comes in. And Valkyrie Profile 2 actually added a story. It actually added fleshed out characters. It actually added character development. It actually had an even better soundtrack than the first game. It had a combat system that was way beyond what the first game ever delivered. And yeah, the Einherjar don't have cutscenes, but they don't need them because there's an actual story. Plus, if you actually read the Einherjar biographies, you'll realise that they're all interconnected and they have lore of their own. They have their own self-contained story within a story that you have to piece together, which is pretty awesome. Whereas Valkyrie Profile, that's all there is. It's just the Einherjar, and they have no relevance to the plot whatsoever, except from like about a few. Like, I can count the number of Einherjar that are relevant to the plot on one hand. That's how few there are. And that's the biggest problem with Valkyrie Profile. I mean, even after everything that happens in the game, at the end of the day, everything's just completely irrelevant just simply because of one plot point. And it involves Lucian, who is an Einherjar in the game. And he's a major character. There's a reason why they show him in the intro cutscene. I'm not going to spoil what it is, but there's a reason why he is all over like the intro cutscene when you play the game, because he is one of the more important Einherjar in the game. But there are a couple of others, though there's not really much to say. I mean, just play 2, guys. Just play Valkyrie Profile 2, and if you like the game, play this. Play Valkyrie Profile. But if you don't like the game, then you're definitely not going to enjoy Valkyrie Profile, because Valkyrie Profile is an ordeal. You really have to be invested in the game's world already to give a shit. Because if you're not, it's very hard to give a shit. And I know that through experience. And that's why I wanted to get across with the video, but this one is just me ranting about it because this game is such a nightmare. I mean, if you read some of the interviews that were done with Masaki Norimoto, he mentions that he wanted to make Valkyrie Profile a challenging game, but I think he kind of got the wrong idea as to what challenge really means, because the game's more of an ordeal than a challenge, and really it's just a difficult game to navigate and a difficult game to actually play, as opposed to a challenging game. It's not necessarily challenging. I mean, in some ways it can be, but for the most part the game's pretty broken, especially once you get skills like Guts, which just break the game. And yeah, there's other ways to break the game as well, but yeah, like, a lot of the game just comes down to RNG at the end of the day, and that's kind of its problem. It's too RNG reliant in the gameplay department, whereas Valkyrie Profile 2, not so much. It's more skill reliant, and that's kind of what it needed. But it's a prototype. It started the whole combat system that would later be carried on to 2. I respect Valkyrie Profile 1 a lot. I do. I'm not going to lie. I think that the game does deserve some praise, but I just think that it gets way too much. And I mean that. Like, it gets way too much praise for what it is. People never bring up its flaws. People never talk about the fact that the characters are underdeveloped. That, you know, Lenneth's character for most of the game, like, for literally 95% of the game, is basically just some stoic goddess who has barely any emotions whatsoever. And that kind of makes her come across as bland for most of the game. But she is what she is. I mean, I don't hate Lenneth. I think she's a decent character, but she's definitely not a perfect character, and I want to point that out. But it's not really her fault, it's the fact that, well, the game is designed to make her that way, because she's a goddess. I'm not going to say too much on that, but yeah, like, honestly, people make out that Lenneth is one of the greatest female protagonists ever, and honestly, I think Alicia is way better, because Alicia actually has character development, and Alicia actually has a more tragic story because, well, she's kind of a human and she goes through, like, human tragedy. I'd actually also argue that Wilfred is a better main character than Lenneth as well, because he goes through very similar sort of situations where he's dealing with the troubles of being human, and it's a very human story, is Covenant of the Plume. Lenneth, she's just a goddess doing her job. I mean, sure, there is a bit more to it than that, but at the end of the day, while she is still a decent character, she's not as compelling as the other two, if you ask me, and she plays the role well enough, just not as good as the others. And honestly, like, people talk about all of the interactions with the characters, which are mostly non-existent, and I don't get it. Like, why do people give so much of a shit about the characters in this game when you barely fucking see any interactions with them? I mean, come on. Like, sure, the characters that do interact are really nice, they're really good, I do like them, but most of them don't. Most of them are just a waste, you know, and that's kind of the problem. I mean, you could argue the same about the Einherjar in Valkyrie Profile 2, but the Einherjar in Valkyrie Profile 2 were a last-minute job. They weren't even needed. Like, the story could work without them, and there's enough characters in Valkyrie Profile 2 that are useful, that are valuable, and they're really well written, the ones that are there that are valuable. And the Einherjar are just a bonus. Like, you don't even need to use the Einherjar at all throughout the game. It is possible to play Valkyrie Profile 2 without ever using the Einherjar, believe it or not. It can be difficult at times, but it is possible if you grind. But like I said, the game added Einherjar to make things easier for the player, and to say that it was a last-minute addition, they really put a lot of attention to detail in the Einherjar, and you can see that the developers really cared with the way that the backstories all weave together, and how you go into battle and the Einherjar that you put in the party start talking to each other like they know each other, which is such a cool little touch, and it's those little touches that make Valkyrie Profile 2 a better game than 1, because it's got those subtle little touches that just make it stand out, that nobody talks about, that nobody gives credit to. And yet, people will nitpick Valkyrie Profile 2 to death for its Einherjar, because, oh no, they got rid of the Einherjar cutscenes, which ruined the game, and the Einherjar talk to each other in battle. That's the story. It doesn't waste your time with needless exposition. You find out their backstory through actually playing the game and seeing their dialogue at the beginning of battle and reading through their biographies if you want to. It's optional. And that's kind of what I like, because you don't have to read into it if you don't want to, but you can if you do want to. And it also encourages multiple playthroughs because you can't get all the Einherjar on one playthrough. So on another playthrough, you'll get other Einherjar and see their backstories, and you'll get something new out of the game, something fresh. And it also helps that the game has 50 difficulties, so there's always a new experience when you play Valkyrie Profile 2 in that regard. I mean, obviously there is a limit to how many new experiences you get, but there is replay value to be had, and the Einherjar system brings that replay value, and that's what's so good about it. But like I say, Valkyrie Profile 1, I still think that it's overrated. But do I think it's a bad game, really? No. That's the April Fool, guys. That's the April Fool. I don't think Valkyrie Profile is bad, but the other April Fool is I'm not lying. This is true. This is true. This is 100% true. I think that Valkyrie Profile is a solid game, but I think it's overrated. I think it's a really good game, but I think it's one of the most overrated games ever made. It's not the most overrated game ever made, but it's definitely one that I want to point out because I'm sick and tired of people singing its praises. It needs to be criticised. People need to call it out for its flaws and actually see that it is a flawed game, because I don't think people can see that. And I can clearly see that Valkyrie Profile 2 has some flaws of its own. But you know what? I can call the game out on it, and I have done numerous times. So at the end of the day, if I can call out the flaws on Valkyrie Profile 2, you guys should be able to call out the flaws on Valkyrie Profile 1. And that's the whole point of this video. But I also have to talk about an underrated game. A game that everybody hates, except me, and like a few other people who are just, you know, brilliant people. This is a game that I absolutely adore. And I mean this in every single meaning of the word. This is one of the most amazing 3D beat-em-ups of all time. This is the game that pretty much set the bar for 3D beat-em-ups. The game that pretty much gave birth to the greatest 3D beat-em-up of all time. And that's a fact, by the way. Well, it might be a fact if you consider the popular opinion, I guess, but, you know, like, it did spawn that specific game that I consider to be the greatest 3D beat-em-up of all time. I should have worded it like that, but yeah, that's a fact. And this game was hated on relentlessly. But you know what? Devil May Cry 2 is a masterpiece. Devil May Cry 2 is one of the greatest games ever made. And I mean that. I really do, because this game allows you to fucking kick enemies in midair and stay airborne when you're kicking them, which you can actually use to build combos, which is really cool. And it's pretty hard to do as well, but if you can do it, it's awesome. On top of this, you have multiple characters for the first time in Devil May Cry history. So if you get bored of playing Dante, you can go and play as Lucia, and if you get bored of playing Lucia, you can go play as Trish. On top of this, the atmosphere in this game is solid. I love the atmosphere. The music in this game is fucking awesome. I love the soundtrack. My favourite soundtrack in the series, hands down, by a mile. And another thing that I like about this game is you can also customize the Devil Trigger, which is kind of cool. Like, you can actually give yourself aerial heart and you'll start flying in the air, and you can also have one that gives you faster running speed as well. You can also decide whether or not you want additional damage or healing with Devil Trigger. So, for example, if you kind of suck, you can have the healing, but if you're confident and you're really good at games, you can put the additional damage to make the bosses go down faster, which is pretty cool. And I also like Mage Inform. Mage Inform is the best part about the game, because if you get to like 1 HP and you enter Devil Trigger, you'll turn to Mage Inform and you will destroy everything. It's one of the most empowering things I've ever seen in a video game. It's really cool, and I definitely think that a lot of people need to give this game a shot. In all seriousness, you know, I know I'm kind of joking. I mean, it's April Fool's Day, what do you expect? I'm basically singing this game's praises when really no one should be singing Devil May Cry 2's praises, but let's put it this way, guys. Let's be honest here, let's be real here. Just like Valkyrie Profile, this is a nuanced thing. I'm not lying. I'm not doing a pure April Fool's lie like everybody thinks. There's truth to lies, people, and there's truth to these lies. I do acknowledge that Devil May Cry 2 is a shit game. I do acknowledge that. I do acknowledge that it's a messy game that has a lot of problems, and it can be kind of frustrating at times because of those problems. Like, you can't really melee most of the bosses because they're like so hard to fucking reach. Like, I swear to God, like, the game was designed around shooting them. But I do think that Devil May Cry 2 has been beaten like a dead horse. I honestly think that people have shitted on Devil May Cry 2 way too much, and honestly, it's not that bad of a game. Yes, it's a mess. Yes, it's kind of broken, but I do kind of weirdly enjoy playing it. It's sort of a guilty pleasure of mine in a way. And to be honest, I think part of that's due to the music and the atmosphere, which I think was solid. I also like Dante's design in this game. I think it's really cool. I mean, yeah, sure, Dante doesn't really fight brilliantly in this game. He's slow and the AI isn't the best. But I do like the aesthetic for some of the enemy designs and the concept for them as well. And some of the levels are pretty cool. Like, they kind of remind me of Painkiller a little bit. Like the whole urban mixed with that gothic style horror like thing that they kind of showcase in the game with just that really eerie vibe throughout. I just love that atmosphere. I just really do, and it's just one of those games that I can just go to and just chill to, because unlike Devil May Cry 1 and 3, which are brutally fucking difficult, I mean, I like Devil May Cry 3 and all, but man, that game gets tiring after a while, you know? All of that fucking hacking and slashing against really tough enemies and trying not to die kind of gets to you eventually. You just want a break, and Devil May Cry 2 is a great way to wind down after a long Devil May Cry 3 session, or beforehand, just to warm up, you know. It's just the perfect way to just cool down, because it's so easy by comparison, but it still has that dark gothic vibe that Devil May Cry 3 has. And while it's nowhere near as good as Devil May Cry 3 and never will be, and it's one of the lesser good 3D beat-em-ups out there, it's definitely far from the worst. I mean, I'd rather play Devil May Cry 2 than Nano Breaker. Like, my god. I'd also rather play Devil May Cry 2 than the Warriors, or, I don't know, some of the earlier Dynasty Warriors games, they're pretty bad. Like, holy shit, and fucking Drakengard. Like, we're really talking about shit territory here, my god. But, yeah, like, honestly, Devil May Cry 2 isn't that bad. And if you heard all the horror stories and people have told you not to try it, I recommend trying it yourself and playing it yourself. You might get a few laughs about how stupid the game is, but you might actually appreciate it a little bit for what it is. I mean, it's a messy game, don't get me wrong, but it's still someone's project. It's still something that someone actually put a lot of effort into making, even if it is a mess of a game. And I know that can be said for a lot of games, but you can clearly see that they were trying to make something really interesting with this game, and it just didn't really work. But at the same time, you know, I think had the development not been such a nightmare and things went smoother, maybe it could have been a better game, because, let's be honest, whoever the director was for Devil May Cry 2 originally, nobody knows, but Itsuno took over partway through and he had to rush the job. He had to fix what he could and ship it out. So, yeah, like, the game never really had much of a chance to really be what it wanted to be. And I think that's kind of a shame, really, and it will always be a shit stain on the series, and I'd like to see the game get a second chance. So I implore you to give this game a chance and see for yourself and be your own judge. You might not like it, but at least you gave it a shot, at least you tried it. I mean, obviously, if you're not into 3D beat-em-ups, I probably wouldn't suggest it anyways, because you're just wasting your time. But if you consider yourself a fan of 3D beat-em-ups, I would give Devil May Cry 2 a shot. I mean, what is there to lose if you have the HD collection? Because you already own it. Play it. Even if you only play it once. I mean, you might not play it multiple times, but it's still there. You might as well give it a shot. And it's not that long of a game either, so what is there to lose? Not much of your life, and you'll get an experience that somebody made that I honestly find memorable. I find this game very memorable, and it does live rent-free in my head someplace, even if it isn't really a large portion of my head. It does have a place in my head that is rent-free, which I can't say that for every game. So yeah, give Devil May Cry 2 a try. It's not a fucking brilliant game, it's not the best game ever made. I'm not going to try and push you to playing it if you don't want to, but you know, if you're curious, just give it a go. But yeah, that's all I have to say, guys. So happy April Fool's Day, guys. I'll see you all later.